Life has a way of settling into a rhythm, especially after 10 years of marriage. My wife, Emily, and I had built what most people would call a picture-perfect life. We had 2 beautiful kids, a cozy home in a quiet suburb, and a love story that had survived the test of time, or so I thought. Our 10th wedding anniversary was a grand affair, just the way Emily liked it. She loved celebrating milestones, and this one was no different. The kids were at my parents' house, giving us the rare luxury of a weekend alone. We spent the evening at her favorite restaurant, toasting to the life we built together. But as we sat across from each other, something felt off. Emily looked stunning, as she always did, but her attention was scattered. She kept glancing at her phone, her smile faltering each time it buzzed. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying it was Sarah, her best friend, bombarding her with memes. It seemed plausible. Sarah had a knack for texting at the worst times, but there was something about Emily's reaction that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the first time I noticed these subtle changes. Over the past few months, Emily had developed new habits, ones that didn't include me. She'd started attending yoga classes twice a week, joined a book club, and even mentioned wanting to learn Italian. I admired her drive to grow and try new things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that these changes weren't just for self-improvement. The first real crack in the facade came during one of our family dinners. Emily casually mentioned a new colleague, Greg, who had joined her team at work. She spoke about him with enthusiasm, recounting his quick wit and knack for solving problems. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Emily had always been friendly with her coworkers. But then, Greg's name started coming up more often. It wasn't blatant, just little mentions here and there. Greg said the funniest thing at lunch today. Or, Greg recommended this great new coffee place downtown. Each time, she'd smile in a way that seemed different. I told myself I was imagining things. Emily and I had been together for so long, we trusted each other implicitly. But doubt has a way of creeping in, whispering in the quiet moments, planting seeds that grow into something you can't ignore. A few weeks later, we attended a charity gala hosted by Emily's company. She was excited about the event, spending hours picking out the perfect dress and fussing over her hair. When we arrived, she immediately blended into the crowd, her laughter echoing through the room as she mingled with her colleagues. That's when I saw him. Greg. He was tall, with a confident smile and an easy charm that seemed to draw people to him. Emily introduced us briefly, her hand lingering on his arm a fraction too long. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes kept flicking back to her, as if I were a formality he had to endure. As the evening went on, I couldn't help but notice the way Emily gravitated toward him. Their conversations were animated, their body language relaxed and familiar. I tried to brush it off as professional camaraderie, but when Greg leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh, a laugh I hadn't heard in weeks, it felt like a punch to the gut. I spent the rest of the night watching them from a distance, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. But when Emily caught me looking and quickly turned away, her cheeks flushed, I knew something was wrong. That night, as we drove home, the silence between us was deafening. Emily stared out the window, her face unreadable. I wanted to ask her about Greg, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready to face the truth. Instead, I lay awake in bed, replaying the events of the evening over and over in my mind. Emily's reaction to Greg, the way she laughed at his jokes, the subtle touches that seemed to pass between them, it all felt too intimate. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like an outsider in my own life. The woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children, was hiding something. I didn't have proof, not yet, but the doubt had taken root. And once doubt takes hold, it's almost impossible to let go. Doubt is a peculiar thing. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or a dramatic announcement. It seeps in slowly, like water finding cracks in a foundation, eroding the stability you thought was unshakable. After the gala, my world felt like it was teetering on the edge, and I couldn't ignore the whispers of suspicion any longer. Emily continued her routine as if nothing had changed. Her late nights at work became more frequent, and she seemed more preoccupied than ever. The small moments that once connected us, sharing coffee in the morning, laughing over silly things the kids said, became rarer. When I brought it up, she'd brush it off with excuses, stress from work, exhaustion, or just needing some space. I wanted to believe her, but the cracks in her stories were becoming too wide to ignore. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids were playing in the backyard, I decided to take a closer look at our finances. Emily and I had always been open about money. We shared a joint account and tracked expenses together. But lately, I'd noticed a few discrepancies, charges I didn't recognize and withdrawals that didn't align with our usual spending habits. As I scrolled through the transactions, one entry caught my eye, a charge from a boutique hotel downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was significant enough to raise questions. I racked my brain, trying to remember if we'd discussed a work event or a night out with friends that might explain it, but nothing came to mind. When I asked Emily about it later that evening, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, that was for a client meeting," she said casually, stirring a pot of spaghetti on the stove. "Greg and I had to meet with a potential partner, and they insisted on a more private setting. It was a little awkward, honestly." She smiled as she spoke, but her explanation felt rehearsed, too polished. "Didn't the office have a space you could use?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She shrugged. "It was last minute, and the client specifically requested the hotel. I didn't love it, but what can you do?" Her answer seemed plausible enough, but something about the way she avoided meeting my eyes made my stomach twist. The next clue came from a source I hadn't expected: Sarah. Emily's best friend had always been chatty, the kind of person who could talk for hours without realizing how much she was revealing. During a casual conversation at a neighborhood barbecue, Sarah mentioned a recent night out with Emily. "She was in such a good mood that night," Sarah said, sipping her drink. "I think she even left early to meet someone." I froze. "Meet someone?" Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know, probably just one of her work friends. Emily's been so busy lately, I'm sure she needed to blow off some steam." I didn't press further, but her words stayed with me. Emily hadn't mentioned going out that night, let alone leaving early to meet someone. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. By this point, I knew I needed answers, but I didn't want to confront Emily without more information. I started paying closer attention to her habits, looking for patterns or inconsistencies. It didn't take long to notice how often Greg's name came up in her conversations. She'd mention him in passing, usually in relation to work, but the frequency was unsettling. "Greg thought of the funniest idea for the campaign," or "Greg recommended this new place for lunch." Each time, her tone was light, but the way she spoke about him felt different. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, I noticed her purse sitting on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling as I rifled through its contents. At first, everything seemed normal: her wallet, a tube of lipstick, a pack of gum. But then I found a receipt tucked into a side pocket. It was from the same boutique hotel I'd noticed in our account, dated just a week ago. My heart sank. I spent the next few days wrestling with what to do. Should I confront her? Hire someone to investigate? Or was I overreacting to a series of coincidences? That's when the anonymous letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope, unmarked and unassuming, slipped into our mailbox among the usual stack of bills and flyers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a simple font. "Your wife is cheating on you. Ask her about Greg." No signature. No explanation. Just those damning words staring back at me. I felt a rush of emotions: anger, fear, heartbreak, but above all, I felt vindicated. The doubts that had been gnawing at me weren't just in my head. Someone else knew. That evening, as Emily sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I watched her closely. She looked so calm, so composed, as if she didn't have a care in the world. "Did anything interesting happen today?" I asked casually, testing the waters. She glanced up and smiled. "Not really. Just the usual chaos at work. Her answer was so ordinary, so normal, that it almost made me doubt myself. But the letter in my pocket told a different story. As I sat there, pretending to watch TV, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed more than a receipt and an anonymous note. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And I was willing to do whatever it took to find it. The anonymous letter sat heavy in my pocket, its words replaying in my mind like a broken record. Someone out there knew about Emily and Greg, knew more than I did, and decided to throw the truth, or at least their version of it, straight into my lap. But what I held wasn't proof. It was a starting point, a match that could ignite everything I thought I knew about my marriage. For days, I lived in a haze of suspicion. Emily carried on as usual, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Her late nights continued, punctuated by vague explanations about deadlines and demanding clients. I found myself studying her every move, dissecting her words and actions for clues. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed evidence. I began with the bank accounts. Emily and I had always shared our finances, but the boutique hotel receipt hinted at something hidden. Logging into our joint account, I searched for anything unusual. While most of the charges were ordinary, groceries, gas, the kids' activities, there were a few anomalies. Small withdrawals here and there, always rounded amounts, always from ATMs located downtown. They weren't enough to draw attention, but they were frequent. And then there was a payment to a name I didn't recognize. Fairfield Financial. Curious, I dug deeper. A quick online search revealed that Fairfield Financial wasn't a bank or a financial service. It was a payment processor often used by subscription-based services or boutique clubs. The revelation sent a chill down my spine. Was Emily paying for something, or someone, I didn't know about? The next clue came from an unlikely source: our kids. One afternoon, while driving them home from school, my son mentioned that Mommy had forgotten to pick them up from soccer practice the week before. "Grandma had to come get us," he said matter-of-factly. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Emily hadn't mentioned missing practice, let alone needing her mother to step in. "Did she say why?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "She said she was stuck at work," he replied, his focus already shifting to the game on his tablet. It could have been true, I told myself. But the growing list of inconsistencies suggested otherwise. Driven by the mounting evidence, I decided to look deeper into Emily's world. One night, while she was out at yoga, I searched her laptop. I knew it was invasive, but I couldn't let my doubts fester any longer. At first, everything seemed normal: emails, work documents, family photos. But buried in a folder labeled miscellaneous, I found something that made my blood run cold. A series of confirmations for a local club membership. The club wasn't one I recognized. It wasn't a gym or a community center. It was exclusive, private, and discreet. The confirmations included scheduled events, most of which coincided with Emily's yoga nights. I dug further, my hands trembling. The club's website was sleek and minimal, revealing little about its purpose. But the members-only section boasted an intimate atmosphere for meaningful connections. Meaningful connections. I wasn't sure what to do with the information. Confronting Emily felt premature, but I couldn't sit idly by while my suspicions consumed me. So, I decided to visit the club myself. The following week, I made an excuse to leave work early and drove to the address listed on the website. The building was unassuming, tucked between a row of upscale boutiques and cafes. A discreet plaque by the door confirmed I was in the right place. Inside, the atmosphere was luxurious and intimate. Dim lighting, plush furniture, and soft music created an air of exclusivity. I approached the front desk, my heart pounding. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her smile polite but guarded. "I'm here to inquire about membership," I lied, trying to sound casual. She handed me a brochure and began explaining the process. As she spoke, I glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the patrons. And then I saw her. Emily. She was seated at a small table in the corner, laughing softly at something Greg had said. He leaned in closer, his hand resting on hers. I froze, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. They were completely engrossed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. I left the club without saying a word. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The image of Emily and Greg together was seared into my memory, shattering any illusions I had left about our marriage. Back at home, I couldn't bring myself to face her. I sat in the dark, replaying the events of the evening over and over. The truth was undeniable now, but I still didn't have the answers I needed. How long had this been going on? Why had she done it? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do next? The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye, her smile warm and genuine, and left for work. Watching her walk out the door, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. That's when I decided to confront Greg. Using the contact information from Emily's emails, I tracked him down to a coffee shop near his office. He was startled to see me, but I didn't give him a chance to recover. "I know about you and Emily," I said, my voice low but firm. Greg's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his body language betrayed him. "Save it," I snapped. "I saw you last night. At the club." He fell silent, his expression a mix of guilt and panic. "Does she know I was there?" I asked, my tone sharp. Greg shook his head. "No. She doesn't." For a moment neither of us spoke. The weight of the situation hung heavy between us. Finally Greg sighed and said, "Look, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." His words felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream, to punch him, to demand answers. But instead I stood there, numb, as he offered a half-hearted apology and walked away. When I returned home that evening, Emily was waiting for me. She smiled as I walked through the door, but I couldn't bring myself to return it. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. The truth was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be unveiled. And when it finally came to light, there would be no turning back. There are moments in life when you realize that the world you've built, the life you've lived, the person you've trusted, it's all been a lie. For me, that moment came on an ordinary evening, when I finally confronted Emily about what I had known in my gut for weeks. The tension between us had been building, and I could feel it in every look, every conversation, every fleeting moment of silence. She wasn't the same, and neither was I. I had spent days, no, weeks, watching her, noticing the subtle changes in her behavior. The late nights at the office that stretched into early mornings. The unexplained absences, the sudden interest in yoga classes, the way she would laugh a little too loudly at her phone. It all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. That evening, I had reached my breaking point. Emily came home late, just like every other night in the past month. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, and she set her purse down with a familiar thud. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the warm, comforting smile I was used to. This one was guarded, hesitant. "Hey, you're up late," she said, glancing at the clock. I didn't respond immediately. I stood from the couch, staring at her, trying to find the right words, the words that wouldn't break everything. But there was no other way. The truth was there, hanging between us like a shadow. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice calm, almost eerily so. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly masked it with a soft smile. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "About Greg," I said, watching her closely. The smile faltered, just a fraction, but it was enough for me to notice. "What about him?" she asked, her voice a little too steady. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered crashing down on me. "I saw you with him," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "At the club. Don't lie to me, Emily. I saw you." Her face went pale. She froze for a moment, and I could see the panic flicker in her eyes. But then she composed herself, pulling her shoulders back. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know what you think you saw, but it wasn't what you think." I couldn't keep it inside any longer. "Don't lie to me!" I shouted, my voice rising in anger. "I know what I saw, Emily. I know what's been going on." She flinched at the sharpness in my tone, but still, she tried to defend herself. "You're overreacting. There's nothing between Greg and me." "Then why are you so defensive?" I shot back, stepping closer to her. "Why are you lying to my face?" Her eyes darted to the floor, avoiding my gaze. I could feel the lie hanging in the air like a thick fog. "Emily, I'm not stupid," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I've been watching you. I've seen the way you look at him, the way you act around him. You're not fooling anyone." For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she wiped them away quickly, trying to hold it together. "I never wanted this to happen," she said, her voice small. "I never wanted to hurt you. But it was too late. The damage had already been done." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Emily? Why betray me like this?" She took a shaky breath, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely, Matt. I felt like you didn't need me anymore. You were always so busy with work, always so distant. And Greg, he listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered." I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. "So that's it? You cheated on me because I was busy with work?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You think that justifies what you did?" "I don't know," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're telling me you just accidentally fell into bed with him? That's how this works?" Her silence was the answer. I could feel the betrayal sinking in deeper, the sharp edge of it cutting through me. "You don't get to do this, Emily," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and pain. "You don't get to destroy everything we've built, everything I've given you, just because you were lonely." She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't want to hear it," I said. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you." But her apology didn't matter anymore. Nothing she could say would undo what had already been done. I paced the room, my mind racing. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I had spent so many years trusting her, building a life together, and now it was all gone. Everything we had was built on lies, and I didn't know how to move forward. "Why?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you talk to me?" "I didn't know how," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was scared. I was afraid you wouldn't understand." I let out a bitter laugh. "Understand? You think I'd understand you sleeping with another man behind my back? You think I'd just forgive you because you were lonely?" Her shoulders slumped, and she wiped at her eyes. "I don't know what to say anymore, Matt. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. And I can't take it back." I stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything. My emotions were a jumbled mess of rage, hurt, and disbelief. "You've already done the damage, Emily," I said, my voice hardening. "You've already destroyed everything." I turned away, walking toward the door. "I need to get out of here," I said, my voice hoarse. I grabbed my keys and left without another word. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away from her, from everything. I drove for hours, aimlessly, until the weight of everything settled over me like a heavy fog. I thought about the years we had spent together, the kids, the house, the dreams. I thought about the future we had planned, the life I thought we would grow old in. And now, all of it was gone. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. The thought of living in a world where she had betrayed me seemed impossible. When I finally returned home, the house was dark. Emily was asleep on the couch, her face streaked with dried tears. I stood in the doorway, watching her, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything, the lies, the betrayal, and I knew that there was no going back. I didn't wake her. Instead, I went upstairs to the guest room, where I would sleep alone. I closed the door behind me, and in the silence, I realized that the life I had known was over. The damage had been done. And there was no coming back from it. It's strange, the way time works after everything falls apart. The days feel longer, but the hours themselves seem to vanish. One moment, I'm staring at the walls of our house, unable to believe what's happened. The next, I'm picking up the pieces, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage she left behind. But how do you rebuild a life when the foundation has been shattered beyond recognition? How do you continue when everything you once knew about yourself, about the world, about the person you loved, is turned upside down? I spent the first few days in a haze, numb to everything around me. I didn't want to see Emily. I couldn't look at her without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. The house felt foreign, empty. It was a place we had once called home, but now it felt like a prison. The memories of our life together were everywhere, our wedding photos on the wall, the kids' drawings on the fridge, the couch where we'd spent so many quiet nights watching movies. All of it, every corner of this house, reminded me of what had been lost. The kids didn't know what had happened. They didn't need to know. But I could see the worry in their eyes as they noticed the tension between Emily and me. They didn't ask questions, but they felt it. I could see it in their quiet glances, their hesitation when they asked if everything was okay. And I couldn't bring myself to lie to them. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when my heart was in pieces. Emily tried to reach out to me, but I ignored her. She left messages, emails, even showed up at my office, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to her. How could I? How could I face the woman who had torn apart everything I believed in? The woman I had once trusted more than anyone in the world? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I had to face the reality of what we were, what we had become. One evening, she came to me, her eyes red from crying. "Matt," she said softly, "can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to say no, to walk away and never look back. But I knew that wasn't an option. The kids were asleep upstairs, and the house was eerily quiet. "What do you want to say?" I asked, my voice flat. I wasn't angry anymore, not like before, but there was a coldness between us now, something I couldn't shake. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for it to get this far. You've already hurt me, Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that. I don't expect you to," she said, her voice small. "I know I've ruined everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. I could see the remorse in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage she had done. "I've been thinking about this a lot," she continued, her voice steadying. "And I know I can't fix what I've broken. But I want to try. I want to make things right. If you'll let me, I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Make things right? You can't make this right, Emily. What you did, what you've done, it's beyond fixing. It's beyond saving." Her eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she said softly. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be a better person. A better mother. A better— I don't know. A better everything." I turned away from her, my chest tight with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said, my voice thick. "How do you come back from something like this? How do you look at someone you've loved for so long and not feel like a stranger?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But I'm willing to try. I'll do whatever it takes." The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of her with Greg, the way they had looked at each other, the way she had smiled at him. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the betrayal. It was like a scar that refused to heal, a wound that kept reopening every time I thought I was moving forward. But I couldn't stay in that place forever. I had to make a decision. And that decision was the hardest one I had ever made. I filed for divorce a few weeks later. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was the only one that made sense. I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to a life that no longer existed. Emily and I had built something together, but that something was gone now. And there was no point in trying to hold on to the ruins of a relationship that had been destroyed. The divorce was messy. The emotions ran high, and the process dragged on for months. But eventually it was over. The house was sold, the assets divided, and Emily moved into a small apartment, while I stayed in the house with the kids. It wasn't easy. The kids had questions, and I did my best to answer them honestly, without dragging them into the mess of our broken marriage. But it wasn't easy. As the months went by, I found myself slowly healing. The pain of the betrayal never truly left, but it became a part of me. I learned to live with it, to carry it with me as I moved forward. I focused on the kids, on being the father they needed me to be. And slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I didn't need Emily's apology. I didn't need her to make things right. I had to make things right for myself. I had to learn to forgive, not her, but myself. I had to forgive myself for trusting her, for believing in something that was never real. A year later, things were different. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't miserable either. I had learned to live with the scars, to carry them without letting them define me. Emily and I still talked, mostly about the kids, but there was no warmth between us anymore. She had moved on with her life, and I had done the same. The pain of her betrayal would never truly go away, but I had learned to live with it. It was a part of me now, and I had to accept it. And as I stood at the edge of this new chapter in my life, I realized something. I had survived. I had survived the worst thing that could happen, and I was still standing. That was all I needed to know. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.